welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. This is my first of the new year, so I feel like I'm really excited to get back in the swing of conversations, and so excited today to be joined by Lena Papadopoulos, who is a life's purpose and leadership coach. And I have been really anxiously awaiting this conversation for a really long time. I heard her speaking on a friend's podcast. We were just talking about this before jumping on, and I immediately knew I wanted to bring that thread of conversation into the podcast. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. And for listeners, you will never know if you're watching YouTube. I wrote a lot of notes to keep myself on track because in our prior conversation, we have so many common interests, and a lot of them allow me to really get out there and start thinking and shoot from subject to subject. So I'm just going to try to keep myself a little bit on track, but we'll see how that goes. Also, the magic will be in wherever we wander, I am sure. So so in this conversation, one of the things that really caught my eye when I first heard you speak at few different places was that I felt like my way of seeing and understanding the world was a little bit related to how I heard you speak about travel, work, and life. And so it really resonated kind of at a deeper level. And I also have a degree in sociology. And prior to that, in my educational journey, which was very winding and is a long story, I felt very kind of lost. Like I was a really good student, but something was not clicking. And when I first sat in my first sociology class, which was like as a later in life student attempting college again, like I just almost came to tears because I really understood how I was processing the world around me. And it was such a revelation. And I had always been curious about culture and kind of people, but I would find myself asking why in a way that people didn't understand what I was asking them. Like I remember asking my dad, "What's in a dollar?" And he's like, "Well, a dime and a quarter and a nickel." And I'm like, "No, that's not what I mean." And still now I don't really understand what I was asking him, but I always wanted this broader understanding of how things fit together and then how that impacted like individuals and the collective. And now as I've aged, I also am kind of trying to see how that impacts me and then how I engage with the world. So I feel like all of the things that you talk about are all of those parts and pieces. So I'm so excited to just navigate all of this with you. But before we get started, Lena, I would love to just understand how travel first started to show up in your life and then how that has begun to shape who you are today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up traveling with my family. I grew up in the United States, but I am Greek, and all of my family, aside from my parents, they live in Greece. So we would go there every year for a couple of months, or we would take trips kind of like in tandem with those trips. So I grew up traveling, but I think it was really, well, one, it was kind of like existing in between cultures. I did always feel like I don't really belong anywhere. And I think that spurred a desire to find, where do I belong and where do I fit in? And then when I was in university, I got really connected to the international student community, and I was very, very involved with that, which kind of shifted my trajectory because I was studying sociology and psychology. I wanted to be a therapist, but I had like a lot of fears wrapped around that. And so I just let this international community sort of like become my life and my path. And when I graduated, I decided that I wanted to get a master's in anthropology to study culture more rather than getting an MSW. So that's what I did. And it was interesting because at that point, by the time I entered grad school, I'd already lived in a few different countries. And so it really put kind of a lot of like theoretical I don't know, context to my lived experience, which was really interesting. Um, and yeah, I don't know, I've just always loved learning about different perspectives and ways of viewing the world. And, one of my favorite quotes is like, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field, I'll meet you there. And this idea of like, how can we find the common ground between all these different perspectives and worldviews? And I really love that. So yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I can see the like younger versions of ourselves both like marching around looking for the same types of answers. Like there's just something I don't know, it's so interesting because it's like I don't want to just accept what I see, like I feel things, and that's where I'm really coming from, is to understand. Yeah, I still feel like I can't figure out what that why is that I'm trying to figure out. Someday maybe I'll understand what that is, but it feels just um really entrenched in what you were saying, like what is beyond this thing that we see in front of us, and how does that work together. The
Mhm.
other thing that really resonated was you saying that growing up traveling between Greece and the US, and living the experience in both places, and how that shaped your identity, but then not really knowing where you belong because you had these two separate places. I grew up on a indigenous on a reservation in the United States in Montana, and I have family that is indigenous, but like it was never acknowledged in my family, or it was even shunned within my immediate family. And so I had that same kind of sense of like, wait, this isn't me, but this isn't me. And I can't fit in this box, and I can't fit in this box. Who am
Mhm.
I? And so I think I also started looking at all these other cultures and like kind of matching myself up to them and contrasting. And then also wondering, like, if I can't fit here and here, can I fit anywhere, or could I belong everywhere? So it also becomes this huge, like, very far reaching quest. But I love that because I think that you and I both use travel and some other tools as this like external exploration and understanding the world and our place in it. So I would love to kind of start this conversation by understanding a little bit about culture. And I love etymology and understanding words and picking them apart and then trying to see like historically what they meant and what they mean now. But that's a side note. But as far as culture, for me, and especially in the context of travel, I feel like when people say the word culture, they are talking about um, arts, customs, social institutions, the things that we experience as culture. And then when I was thinking about, especially from a sociological perspective, I started to think about how those elements kind of lay down on top of us. And that's how we see the world, which becomes our cultural conditioning, I think, in a way. But I would love for you to just talk about a little bit about what culture means to you. I know that you were really initially drawn into intercultural education, but now you're kind of more in this space of the cultural conditioning. So I'd like to just hear what that journey has looked like and that understanding of culture has been for you.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think kind of the things that you listed off in at first are these very like tangible, visible aspects of culture that a lot of, I'm sorry, I have this like like frog in my throat, but there are these, yeah, like what we would consider these visible aspects of culture, but there's like so much more to it than that, right? Like, because what culture really is the driver of why we do the things we do, why we believe the things we believe, why we wear the clothes we wear, eat the foods we eat. And I actually, when just before we got on and you mentioned this, I pulled up a few of my favorite definitions culture to share. Um, One by a sociologist, Geert Hofstede, is that culture is the collective programming of the mind, which distinguishes the members of one group from another. It is based on another definition, like where we get our sense of identity. It is transmitted from generation to generation, right? So it is something that we very much inherit our cultural perspective and worldview. And then a couple of my favorites. One is from Edward T. Hall, that culture hides more than it reveals. And strangely enough, what it hides most effectively from its own participants. And then the other by Clifford Geertz. Man is an animal suspended in webs of significance he himself has spun. I take culture to be those webs. So it's very much right, like the way in which we create meaning in the world, and it's how we learn to relate to, I don't know, to different people, to institutions, to people that are like us, people that are unlike us. And yeah, it's just such a, right, it really colors the perspective with which we with which we see the world. And what I loved about working in intercultural education is that when you look at kind of what's under all of that, we are all so connected, right? And we're all actually thinking and feeling the same things, but we're very much kind of confined in a lot of ways by culture and our conditioning. And part of the reason I transitioned into the work that I do now is because what I saw is that most people, like, their greatest fear is to live their truth and is to express the truth of who they are. And the main thing that creates, or sort of like, I don't know how to say, but yeah, just strengthens this fear is culture, is the conditioning around, like, who are you supposed to be and what are you supposed to want and how are you supposed to behave. And so yeah, it's like this really beautiful concept that allows us to understand things in a nuanced way if we choose to. But it's also something I think that imprisons people in so many ways as well.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting when you look at that, because it's, again, kind of like moving from this broad definition and understanding and bringing it really down to self, which I think when people maybe first start traveling, they are curious about cultures, or maybe they want to experience cuisine or art or something. And so that's kind of this broad experience. But then there's another sect of travelers that are wanting to use that to understand themselves. And so then they're kind of moving into that aspect of how culture becomes identity. And then you all of a sudden become completely self-exploring the world. And so it's a really interesting parallel between, you know, culture and travel and inner exploration. Like, I think it just funnels right into one another. If you stay in the swirl of it long enough, like, you'll get to this other side of seeing culture. And also, like you said, understanding ourself is so important so that we can start to see that conditioning, and then also kind of, I think, respect what we're witnessing as a traveler even more once you see that it is larger than just this kind of superficial culture. Like, it is really embedded in who we are. And then if you're trying to talk about breaking free from your cultural conditioning and starting to be your true self, what does that mean to this vaster understanding of culture? Because then, and I found this, I think, really in my own experience with wanting to embrace, what does it mean to be a Native American? What does that look like? Can I even embrace that? Do I have permission? And then I really realized, like, what I was saying is, this part of me feels really true, but my cultural conditioning says it's not. And so, then you are really seeing how these two things start to be connected in such a deep way. And I think on the surface, a lot of people try to link travel and inner journey or understanding self, and they seem not together. But once you really start to explore, they are intersected in the way that culture and cultural conditioning and self are. Um,
Mhm.
I'm hoping that this is sparking some thought for people listening, because I feel like it's such a deep space to start playing in. But I don't know, what are your thoughts around some of that?
Yeah, well, like as you were speaking, I was thinking about one of the definitions I shared, which is that what culture hides, it hides most effectively from its own participants. So it's like when I would work with groups of people from other cultures and they would come to the US, where at the time I was facilitating some cross-cultural exchange programs, it's like they would engage and interact with our students, and the questions that they would ask each other all the time were like, well, why do you do this? And why do you do this? And everybody's like, well, I don't know why we do that. And it's because it's so normalized, whatever it is that you believe or practice or your perspective, to you, it's just, that's the way it is. So you don't question it. But when you travel and when you enter a different world and way of being and engaging with people and the world at large, that's when you really start to question everything that up until then for you has been normal. And then you start to say, well, maybe it's not so normal, and maybe there are other ways of being or doing or existing in the world. And so I think that's one of the biggest reasons why travel is such a powerful tool for inner exploration, is because it really does. And not for everybody, I think it is a choice, because some people travel the whole world over and never question anything, and then they just stay completely right in the mindset that they had before they left. But if you use it as an opportunity to question things, then I think it allows you to be more in tune and connected with, who am I outside of this construct, you know?
Yeah, it's really valuable. And also kind of the quote that you said before, like meeting in the field beyond the this other truth, is, I think then you are able to say like, oh, this is this thing and this is this thing, but also neither of them are true. And then
Mhm.
you can start to create your own reality. And I was even thinking, this is so superficial and silly, but my daughter recently discovered like curling your eyelashes. And she said like, oh, mine are so straight, not the way they should be. And I was like, well, who told you like the way your eyelashes should be? And so then I was like, they are how they are. And where you are depending on your cultural norm is telling you if how it should be one way. Anyway, it's a super simple example, but I was just thinking like it's so embedded. And again, like you said, we don't see all the things that happen on a really regular basis about how we show up and who we become based on the things that surround us. um I The other thing that I love that you are talking about, and I think this is something that people kind of get to as they're in this journey, is thinking about purpose. And one of the things that I really love about Soul of Travel Conversations is that I feel like most of my guests, if not all of my guests, are kind of bringing what is from within them outward through their work. And so it's really a true expression of themselves. And that really is what Soul of Travel comes from. Like, this is people who have maybe heard that truth within themselves and are able to express it through their work and bring their mission to life. And that's always on a spectrum. Like, I think we understand a part of ourselves and we grow, and then we have to do this all over again.
Mhm.
But I think that understanding purpose is so important. And so I would love to talk to you a little bit about that. And one of the questions, I think, when we step into this realm is, do we even believe that every person has a soul purpose? So I'd love for you to maybe answer that gargantuan question, and then like help us to understand the different shapes that that purpose takes over our life. I know that you have kind of a framework for understanding purpose. So let's, I guess, jump
Yes.
into the purpose pool.
Yes. So you're right. I have this kind of framework that it's just really the result of talking to a lot of people about purpose and approaching purpose from different perspectives and lenses, and kind of my own right perspective based on all of that. But with that, it's like, I believe we all have our core purpose. At our core, all of us are here to return to the truth of who we are. That's like literally why we exist. Is to remember that, one, that we are love, we are divine love, and then through that, like our truest self-expression, our true core purpose is to embrace and embody that. And then our sort of soul's purpose is really like, again, I mean, it depends right on your worldview and perspective. So I come from the perspective that we are reincarnating, that we have lived past lives, that we are here with like lessons to learn. And so our soul's purpose is to navigate these particular lessons that our soul has chosen to learn in this lifetime, which are all designed to bring us closer to the core of who we are, the truth of who we are. And then with that, we, just by being who we are, we serve the collective. And that is like our life's purpose. Our life's purpose is to share our magic as medicine with other people. And then how that looks is going to change over the course of our lives, depending on where we are, what lessons we've learned, what wisdom we've gained, what experiences we've had. So, you know, when I was an intercultural educator, and now that I'm a life purpose and leadership coach, I believe my purpose was the same, but it is manifesting differently, right? It looks different, but it hasn't really changed. I'm just doing it in a different way. So yeah, I believe we all have a purpose. We're all here for a reason, which is really just to honor and help and serve each other through our unique self-expression. Mm-hmm.
It's so good. And I love like having this conversation now, as opposed to, I was even thinking like 5 years ago, and I would have just been like in such a different space to have the conversation. And so for people listening, I just would love to honor that growth journey, and that for some people this is going to be like, yes, and for some people it's going to be like, what are you talking about? And both reactions are true. Again, like there is no true, and it's just where you are at on this journey. And I was even thinking about that in the context of my birth chart and natal chart, which is something I'd love to bring into this conversation as well, which is another tool for kind of maybe understanding purpose in a way that feels a little more tangible, although I guess that's also relative, because some people would say, what are you talking about? For me, I'm like, oh, this feels very like something I can put in my pocket. But I did this 5 years ago, and I was thinking about how I could only hear and understand what I was ready to hear and understand. And if I go back and hear the same thing, I'm going to hear something else, because I've grown in my understanding of myself and of the world and my identity and all these different pieces. But what I loved so much about the birth chart in the context of understanding my purpose, which was where I really was at that point, was trying to be like, what on earth am I doing? Like I'd had all these shifts in my life, and I was like, I need to have something that tells me what I'm doing, because I feel like I'm floundering and I just need an answer. And when I had my natal chart read, I was like, oh my gosh, like there I am. Like it's
Mhm,
literally written in the stars.
mhm,
And and I was at this point where there were like parts of me that felt true, but also I think bumped up against my cultural conditioning. So I was really trying to repress them or just be like, no, that's not right. That's not me. But when I just saw it like written there, I was able to go, oh, that is me. Like I have permission to be that part of myself. So I would really like to, I guess, move into this. How can we use astrology as a way to really start to see ourselves and then kind of work from there towards purpose and then towards how we put that out into the world through our business or our way of being.
mhm. Yeah, so I mean, I love astrology because I feel like it brings all of these things I've been talking about together.
Mhm.
And your natal chart is like the blueprint to your soul. And so it shows you who is the truth of who you are outside of your conditioning. Who are you at your core? But then it also shows you what is the conditioning that has kept you from being and expressing the truth of who you are. So I use the chart, like I read through the lens of evolutionary astrology, which is really looking at what is the soul's purpose? Why did you reincarnate in this lifetime? What lessons are you trying to learn? What direction is your soul moving toward? And what direction is it coming from? So we look a lot at like past life patterns and trauma signatures in the chart that are playing out through your conditioning because they are challenges and lessons your soul is trying to navigate and overcome in order to return to that core truth of who you are. And so, yeah, the chart is so powerful. I love it. And, so many people are like, oh yeah, my sun sign is this, but I don't really resonate, or like, it's so broad and general and vague. And it's like, well, yeah, because that is such a tiny, tiny piece. Like there's this really like complex and interconnected picture that you don't see just by knowing your sun sign, right? There's so much to look at in a chart, and there's so many specializations within astrology. Like, I mean, you can go to an astrologer just to learn about medical astrology, like what your chart has to say about your body. And, that's something I don't know much about, but it's like there's so much in there. Um, yeah, I love
Yeah.
it.
I would really encourage people if they haven't done it, even to just to get a sense of like what you're saying of the vastness of information is to pull their birth chart, which there's free apps that you can do that in. I don't know if you have one that you would want to recommend, but you just see it and you're like, I mean, you will never understand it if you don't know what you're looking at, but you're like, oh, I get it. It's kind of like when you were talking, I was thinking about baking. Like if you know what a cup is for to measure in baking, like great, but you can't make anything if you only know what a measuring cup is for. Like there's all these other things within the realm of baking before you're going to get anything on the other side of that. And so I was thinking that, that was kind of how I could maybe understand what we know about astrology in a common way, which, like you said, is the sun sign, which for me, luckily, or I don't know, luckily, like mine is Pisces. And what I ever read about felt very true to me. Like I would read it and I would be like, oh, but also it would feel kind of like the deepest parts of me and also kind of the parts I would protect of myself. Like the parts I didn't want anyone to know about me were my Pisces parts that I was like, those are kind
Mhm.
of sacred. And I don't know that I want those to be like on my sleeve. And
That's
then,
sorry, go
oh,
ahead.
no, I was going to say, then as I learned like about moon sign and rising signs, I was like, oh, I see why like those are my parts, because like you said, most people would say, oh, I'm a this, but it doesn't mean anything to me. But because, and you can speak to this if you like, but like that's not what's presenting to the world, or those are the parts of you that are like your deepest parts. And then trying to understand how those manifested in my business, and then even eventually understanding how I travel because of of who I truly am. I just find it so interesting, but go ahead and interject.
What I wanted to say was that it's interesting what you say about Pisces, because yes, you have a Pisces sun, but you also have your Neptune, which is the planet that has like Piscean energy. The planet of Neptune is in the 12th house, which is the house connected to Pisces. And the 12th house is also the most hidden house of the chart. Like that's the part of you that the fewest people see, or that you let the fewest people see. So yeah, it's very interesting that you said that.
Yeah. So ding, ding, ding. Like for people, if you're wanting to understand and validate things, it's so funny. Like it's not funny. It just happens like that all the time. And I just, again, kind of like sitting in that sociology class the first time and like starting to see how I see the world when I had that first chart. And like I said, how empowering it was like, this is you, and this is how you do this thing, and this is how you have to like navigate and overcome this thing. Like it's just such a play by play for who you are. And it's so uncanny. Like it feels a little weird at first because someone can see you in a way that maybe you haven't allowed someone to see you before. And so for me at this point, I get really excited about that because there's now a part of me that's like, I want you to see that, because now that feels like my most valuable asset and I don't want it hidden as much, which I'm sure that's somewhere in the chart as well. But yeah, I just think that it's such an interesting journey to be able to understand yourself through that way. When you're working with clients and you use this tool, how does that start to show up in understanding their purpose, and then in understanding what their I can't remember what it is right now purpose. Yeah,
Mhm.
right now purpose. That's it. I remembered the right thing. And how that kind of moves into their life purpose. Like, how do you use that?
Mhm. Um, as you were speaking, like a specific person, an example came to my mind. So I'll just share from that. So for example, I had a client that really hid her softer, more vulnerable, more feminine, more caretaking kind of side. It was something she very much rejected all of her life. She tried to be very like, I'm strong, I'm independent, I am the boss, I tell people what to do. Like it was just this very like this energy that she felt she had to project into the world. And when we started looking at her chart, I was like, I mean, the biggest part of your purpose is like to be more feminine, like to embrace the feminine side of you, and to embrace like, I want to be a caretaker and a nurturer. And like it was so obvious, and she was just like, like, I know that deep inside, I know that. And that's why I project this other part, because I'm so scared of that part of myself, right? Like to really to be that. And of course, like we could see in the chart, even there were so many things connected to her family of origin that had created that the conditioning around that. And as she stepped more into that part of herself and practiced embracing those qualities, then this other dream that she had, that she'd also kept kind of like pushed down, started to come out. And that was a dream which ironically was very connected to the energy of Venus in her chart, but which is around, beauty and aesthetics and expressing yourself in a more visual way. I mean, Venus has a lot to do with a lot of things, but that's part of it. And this dream that she had was that she wanted to be like a stylist for people. She wanted people to feel good about the way they looked and to feel good about themselves because of how they looked and how they dressed and styled themselves. And so it was like it was just these parts of herself that she had very much denied or disowned or rejected. We could see that in the chart, and it felt true to her, right? Like deep within her, when we spoke about it, it wasn't something like, oh, that doesn't resonate with me. She had known those things, but hadn't wanted to really admit them. And yeah, now she's like, I feel so amazing that I am expressing this part of myself. She started a business where she is helping people express themselves through right, how they dress, how they look. And so she's very much, yeah, she's very much now living. I mean, of course, with challenges, it's not like it's, I don't know, it's always going to have a challenge there, but she's very much living her sole purpose and her life right now purpose, you know? So yeah, I love that. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't
no, I think it's great. And I think like some of the things that I've talked about too is if you look at the journey of many of the women that have been on my podcast that have left like corporate corporate life on, really like 9 to 5 grind, and the way that our culture has conditioned us to perceive success by getting your degree and your higher education, and earning 6 figures and buying a house, or all these levels of success that we can see externally. And then people start kind of crashing up against that, and I think that's because it doesn't align with their true purpose. For some people it does, because that's very much meant to be how they're to serve the collective. But for the people that have just tried to find that path because it was the thing that the blueprint they were given originally from our culture, then when you like let go of that, you're in a lot of turmoil. But then if you can find this purpose and understand it, whether that's being lucky to work with someone like you, or on your own if you've walked that journey, and then whatever you create, how you're showing up in that more authentic space serves in such a much more powerful way, regardless of what it is. And then I think what we have to do as a people living in the US or in a Western culture, then we're going up against the conditioning. Let's, in the example you said, like as a stylist, she maybe has to say like, I'm not showing, I'm having a hard time putting words, but like in our culture, we maybe really value lawyer, doctor, CEO, executive. And then you have to say with your full self, I am a stylist and I am deeply passionate about it and I serve others through doing it. And our cultural conditioning goes, well,
yeah.
and but we have to be able to stand in that. And even, as someone who creates the trips that I create, and really my purpose that I understand is to allow women to fully express themselves and to live also their truth, which is funny because you say like that is all of our purpose. And I think I just want to see women do that, but I do that through guiding them on these journeys. But if I say that's what I do, people are like, what? And if I say I run a travel company, they're like, okay. And even like, I'm kind of like a travel agent, but not, then they go, okay, good. I know where to put you. So we're kind of circling back to cultural conditioning and how if our purpose doesn't kind of stack up to some level of success, it's really hard to step into it, I guess. So we have to shed that cultural conditioning to be
Yeah.
ourselves. But that magic that you're putting out into the world once you do is so great, regardless of what your magic is. So if your magic is a baker, or your magic is a gardener, or your magic is a lawyer, like that I think is so important. And it's just not something I don't think it's something we're taught in our culture. And you and I were talking about this before, that I went to Guatemala and participated in a Nahual ceremony, which is the Mayan version of astrology and understanding your life purpose through the day that you're born as well. And they're like, this is the thing you were due. This is the day you entered the portal to this planet, and it comes with this mission. And they're like, here's your answer. Like, you don't even have to look. Like, you're not supposed to be this. You're this. You just are. This is how you chose to be here. And when he read that to me, or through the translator, they read that to me, I was like, oh gosh, it makes so much sense. And this is where I can add my magic. And I just wonder for me, maybe coming back to that greater why as a little girl, like if we didn't all embrace that, what would the world look like without these constraints of cultural conditioning and really being true expressions of self? And I just went all over the place. But where does how does that resonate, or what knowledge do you have to offer based on that rambling?
Um, well, I'm curious, what did they say at the ceremony? Can you
Yeah,
share?
what they said, that he saw me as a leader of women, helping them to explore and to guide them on a spiritual journey, but also to help them understand the world around them. And he said, like, I see you like leading women in some way to explore things. And I was like, huh, that's crazy. Because to the best of my knowledge, he had no clue who I was from anyone. And I hadn't shared anything at that point. And so it was just very interesting that it was so specific to like the thing I felt inside of really helping women to see that or to feel that. And it wasn't like you should do XYZ. It wasn't just like an exact map, but it felt true to like this thing inside of me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have like so many, mm, I don't know, yeah, like so many placements in your chart in the 11th house of community and groups, and yeah, just like understanding yourself through other people, but also serving in community. Like you are bringing in this life your past life, like gifts and skills, like you're very much bringing that um into the communities that you're in and a part of. And that's also connected, yeah, like to your career. It's connected to your emotional sense of fulfillment. It's connected to part of your purpose, which is to connect to the non-material world more than the material world. Like you have a lot of past life sort of experience, I guess, being like very practical and grounded and stable and like having strong foundations in the material world. And like in this life, you're really, there's a transformation happening through your connection to community that helps you connect to the more non-material spiritual side of yourself as well. But there's also a lot of past life trauma around that too. So it could create some conflicting feelings possibly, but
Yeah. And for those of you listening, I was able to send Lena my chart information, so she looked at it a little bit, because I was really curious to just see and to share how this is expressing itself in my life, and to also kind of let some of you see behind the curtain about how this works, or how you can use this to interpret what your purpose is, and just really see the knowledge that this offers. So if you're listening and you're curious, definitely reach out to her, and at the end we'll share how you can work with her to find more about your own journey. But yeah, and it's, for me, it's always so interesting, because like when you say that, I like can feel the thing you're talking about. I don't know what it is, but like I feel the truth of what that is. And I just think that's such an interesting thing too, because again, I don't think we're really taught to wander through this much in our culture. And I do think in other cultures, it is a little still more of a part of their way of understanding who they are, in different ways. And so I think that's also what really drew me to travel. Like I found myself really leaning into wanting to understand and connect with Indigenous communities around the world. And I think part of that, going back to the beginning, was my sense of isolation from that part of myself growing up. But also I felt like something deeper, in that there was a way of understanding the universe that I didn't have access to, but I saw those communities as access points. And so I was really drawn to that. And so I don't know how, as travelers even, or as people engaging with the world, do you see someone's natal chart showing how they're going to seek that information? We were also talking about this before this conversation, like the link between travel and soul searching and like spark of wanderlust. And there seems to be like entrepreneurs and travelers and creatives have this thing that like asks them to search. And I'm just wondering, like, is it literally part of what is written in who they are? And then does that have you going out in search of answers in a way that reflects your natal chart or, something greater than ourselves?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's really the chart holds kind of like a range of possibilities, I guess I would say, of how something will manifest. So it's not necessarily that it says like this is exactly how this looks and how it will happen, but it's like there's kind of this range of possibilities, and the more that you know, it is helpful to know about a person's lived experiences, because that makes the possibilities kind of come to life and connect in a way where you're like, okay, I can see how this is actually playing out, and also just to see how all the things are interconnected and interrelated. But like you can very much clearly see like what is the soul wanting to do. But then the way in which it does that, it can depend on a lot of different factors. But like for example, another thing I can see here is that in your chart, I don't know if you want me to share my screen or not to
No,
see
it's
that.
okay.
Um, but it's like there's this um these past life patterns of feeling incredibly judged by society, of like not fitting in and not being who you're supposed to be. And your greatest sort of like power and potential in this life is found in you understanding what that looks like for you, independent of anybody else's opinion, right? It's very much about like, I decide from within what is right and true for me and what I'm supposed to do, not what I'm told to do. And there's very much this like energy of independence and leadership and taking charge and being courageous and just like going out into the world and doing the things. Like that's part of how you I guess actualize that power and potential within you. And it could, right, like again, this is why we would speak in a consultation. So we would have dialogue, right, about what this has looked like in your lived experience. But based on these placements, it could mean either like separating from your family of origin, or deciding that you don't want a family of your own, that you would prefer to be more independent and on your own and doing your own thing. And really like also kind of maybe detaching from any desire to people please, or like to serve others in order to be seen as like good or right, or as you're supposed to be. So yeah, like you're just really learning to like forge your own path. But what that looks like kind of depends, yeah, on experiences that you've had.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting too, because I feel like that's the thing I most want to like show other people how to do. And it's the thing that I'm learning. And I think another thing that you and I talked about is like the thing that you most fear and resist is the thing you most need to lean into. And I also think like the thing that you are constantly drawn to is you might be drawn to it for yourself. Like you think you're being drawn to it for others over and over again, but really it's because it's yours. And I just think that's really interesting too. And I see that often in other people's businesses, especially entrepreneurs. Like I think we have this thing that we are working through or growing through, and it ends up manifesting itself in its work, in our
Yeah.
work. And
Right.
then, 5 years later, that thing's gone because we've grown through that. And now we're ready to do the next thing. And so, like, we end up taking people along on our growth journey through our entrepreneurial journey because we're just navigating those things and progressing. And I just think that that is a really interesting to witness in others. And even today, I just saw a girlfriend post kind of like the next version of her business, and I can see like how she grew to that space. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like, I'm so excited to see that you're now there and you're able to, and I also feel like I can see that being like one step closer to that truest part of her that I kind of see within her. I don't know. So it's really, for me, I love stepping into the space. But well, before we end this conversation, for those listening who would love to learn more about how to put this in practice in their own lives, how can they connect with you to learn about what their path is and their purpose is?
Yeah, well, my website, I guess, is a good place to learn more about the offerings, which is just my name, lenapapadopoulos.com. The challenge is spelling, but I know you'll provide it. And then my Instagram, which is the same, my name. But yeah, and I have a way to contact me by email in both of those places. So
Excellent. Well, I would really encourage anybody who is like feeling something through this conversation to just lean into that. And I just think that our purpose and understanding who we are and whatever tool you use to do that is such an important part of, like you said, of why we're here. And for me, that is travel in like so many different ways and understanding culture and who I am. And so I really appreciate you playing in this realm of conversation with me today. And I hope that people listening also, really have their curiosities piqued and can ask some new questions. But the last thing before we go is I have a series of rapid fire-ish questions for people to get to know you a little bit more as a traveler. So we'll end with those.
okay.
So what are you reading right now?
I'm rereading a book called Healing the Soul, which is looking at the chart through the lens of evolutionary astrology, but in a therapeutic way, like in a therapy-based way.
What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
A shower caddy, like the things that you hang on a hook where all your
Yeah.
toiletries are.
Yeah. And we didn't even really get to talk that much about traveling, but Lena is always traveling. She is a traveler in the truest sense of the world in the truest sense of the world. I love that misspoken. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there for a short period of time. I know you've had the opportunity to do this often, but where is a place that you would love to sojourn?
Like that I haven't been.
Yeah.
Oh my God, so many, but Japan is one of the first that comes to mind.
What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place that you've been?
Um, Khao soy.
And what is that?
Oh my God. It's a curry from northern Thailand.
Oh, okay. Well, and I have spent a lot of time in Thailand and I didn't even recognize. Who is a person that inspired and encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
A friend of mine named Nigel. Yeah.
If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
Mm, I don't know, like Brene Brown and Carl Jung came to my mind. Like those two people.
Perfect. when you go with Brene, please invite me. Because I just want to sit somewhere and have conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be so great. Who is one woman in the travel industry that you admire and would love to recognize in this space? Or even in the realm of growth and journeys as well. I know you're not exactly in the travel space, but you are a
Hmm.
traveler.
Oh my gosh, I don't
If you think of someone, you can share it with me later. Yeah, I just love to be able to create a space to amplify the voices of
know.
women that are inspiring us in our lives. So, well, I really appreciate this conversation, and I think that it's magic. This is where I love to spend a lot of my time. So this is giving my listeners a kind of different perspective on me and like what I really think travel and journeying is. And I love that we were able to kind of bring this to this Soul of Travel podcast today.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.